Ready? Good evening. I'd like to call to order the City of San Carlos City Council, successor agency to the Redevelopment Agency and Housing Authority regular meeting for February 12, 2018. Please rise and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right. Thank you. Are there any changes to the order of the agenda?
None from staff this evening, Mr. Mayor.
One on the dais? Hearing none, move on. Presentations. Present a proclamation to Insight Float in recognition of receiving certification as a San Mateo County green business. Are the representatives? Okay, great. Thank you. Am I on? I'm on. Let me check that. So we have two things. We have two tonight for you, one from the city of San Carlos and one from the county of San Mateo. This is, it may not seem like a lot to a lot of people, but this is really a big deal to promote businesses that can, or to have businesses promote green and conservation with LED lighting and public transit and low toxic materials. I'm not going to read all the whereases here, but we have, how many do we have now in the city? 25, 30, 35? It's a good number. Okay, we have a lot. And anyway, it's an important situation, and we want to honor the folks that do the hard work in the different companies to do this and still show that you can have a business. So anyway, this is the one from us, and then we have one signed by all 5 supervisors for the county. And I'm going to ask you to give me 30 seconds and tell me what is Inside Float, because I have no idea. And identify yourself.
Hi, my name is Anna Beshin-Jones. I'm from Insight Float. We are a flotation spa, just actually maybe a 10-minute walk from here. Flotation therapy is it's the best relaxation you can get. It's great for seniors, it's great for athletes, it's great for maternity, it's great for everybody.
Thank you. Now I know what it is, because there wasn't any description of they just give you all the great kudos for doing all this stuff. And thank you very much. I really appreciate it. Okay. Thank you. And nice to see you. Take care. Did you get it? Okay, good. Okay, now I know where to go after the meeting to relax. So, all right, item 5 is public comment. Persons wishing to address the City Council on matters not on the posted agenda may do so now. Each speaker is limited to 2 minutes. We normally do not talk or answer questions from the dais on different items, but we certainly want to hear from folks if they have things they want to say. So I have 2 cards so far. Tanya Beat. Welcome.
Thank you. You can hear me okay?
Yeah.
Thank you. My name is Tanya Beat. I'm the interim director for the Commission on the Status of Women for the County of San Mateo. And I'm here tonight just to simply tell you about a really unique event that is happening on March 24th. If you've lived here for a certain amount of years, you may be familiar with the Women's Hall of Fame, which has been happening for over 30 years now. We are having a Women's Hall of Fame on the 24th, and this year, uniquely, are doing a Women's Leadership Conference. So I felt it really important to come to San Carlos. In fact, all commission members are going out to all city council meetings to share this event. So it's open to anyone in the public. We have amazing speakers, and we have 3 amazing women that we are honoring this year. I did provide flyers for information, and of course we have a website. So I just wanted to let you all know about this and let anyone, not just women, but women, men, children, teens, to be able to come to this event, to be able to get into leadership development and have a conversation about women's leadership. Thank you.
Is there a cost to the conference or any of the items here?
There is. Registration costs $100, but we are giving out discounts, so it's about an $80 fee for both events.
Okay.
If you just want to go to the Hall of Fame, that is only $40.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
Thank you, Tanya,
Thank
very
you.
much. Appreciate it. Okay. Our next speaker card is Bob Daner.
Good evening. Usually only hear up here when I talk about parks, which is really what I'm here to talk about. You know, I have often commented that our community has been shaped by the many ways, by the active involvement of our citizens. That's how community is built, working together for a common benefit. What I want to speak to tonight relates directly to the proposal to install lights at the stadium field. In 2005, the City Council appointed a Fields Committee of some 28 citizens, including myself, to look at and to make recommendations to resolve issues surrounding our heavily used athletic fields. Those members were chosen through interviews by the City Council from a pool of applicants to represent every interest group in our community. The committee was facilitated by 2 sitting City Council members and agendized by Barry Weiss, our City Parks Director. So City Council, and community were all involved. We met for well over a year looking at every possible solution and option available. The resultant solution, which I supported, was to install an all-weather field under the lights at the Lower Highlands. At that time, and this is where the important part, there was also an agreement with the city that there were to be no lights nor artificial turf at the stadium field. This solution would offer the best of both worlds. Now, all of the records of that committee are in the city's archives. My recollection of that agreement is the same as 3 other members of that committee with whom I recently spoke. Now, I recognize that the City Council has the prerogative to undo any agreement. But to disregard these citizens' efforts who volunteered their time and energy to work with the city to solve a community problem, to me, is a breach of the principle of good faith and fair dealing. Thank you.
Thanks, Bob. Sorry for the bell. I'm still learning here. And I'm sure you did a good job. That was I'm just about right on it. Thank you for comments, Bob. Is there anyone else wishing to speak on any item not on the posted agenda tonight? All right, we'll move on. Item 6 is the consent calendar. Consent calendar items are usually done in one motion. Do I hear a motion?
I move approval.
All right, move. Is there a second?
Second.
All right, any discussion? Hearing none, roll call, please.
Councilmember Collins?
Yes.
Councilmember Grocott?
Yes.
Councilmember Johnson?
Yes.
Councilmember Obert?
Yes.
And Mayor Grisilli?
Yes, all right. Moving on, item 7A, consideration of adopting a resolution approving the Neighborhood Traffic Management Program. Ms. Peterson, Ms. Lee, this looks like a parade. How long is this going to be?
Short.
Short, okay, great. Thanks, Tara.
Good evening, Council. My name is Tara Peterson. I'm the Interim Public Works Director. Before you this evening for your consideration is the Neighborhood Traffic Management Program. Just a little bit of background. The City Council, as part of their strategic plan back in 2016, asked the staff to develop a clearly defined process for handling traffic calming requests. And then from there, staff took a look with the Transportation and Circulation Commission and a consultant into options and developed a draft plan for your consideration, which was brought to you during a study session in September of 2017. At that time, Council had various comments and suggestions for the plan. And with that, the consultant went back and looked at a few of the comments and clarified a few things. And this evening, he is here to speak on that. Grace Lee, of course, our city engineer, is here to answer any of your questions. And with that, I'll introduce Christopher Thanay with Stantec.
Thank you, Tara. Thank you, Mayor. Council members, Christopher Thanay with Stantec. So, this is essentially to elaborate on a few questions that you have. regard to the neighborhood traffic management program, regard to the screening criteria and recommendations from the September 25th study session. So there are three criteria we'll elaborate a little. First is the speed criteria. The 85th percentile speed as part of the NTM Neighborhood Traffic Management Program is that for all the three different roadways, for the local street, collector street, or arterial, would need to be more than 7 miles per hour. So one of the questions is why 7 miles per hour? So as you can see in the table 1 here, there are many cities that adopt pretty similar guidelines. But also a key point is that 7 miles per hour is also one of the criteria that would trigger in terms of speed limits. So we thought that would be a good also criteria to use at the same time for the speed criteria. The next criteria is the traffic volumes criteria. So it's based on average daily traffic. For all the three different roadways, local street, you will need to be more than 1,200 vehicles per day. For collector street, which is a larger street usually, need to be about 4,000 vehicles per day. And for much larger arterial streets, need to be about 13,000 vehicles per day. So before we adopt all these, we did look at the city-wide in terms of all the different roadways, what are the type of volumes you are getting. So one of the questions was why average daily traffic and not just look at the peak hour where a lot of congestions occur, and also sometimes you do see some cut-through traffic. But speed and cut-through actually occurs throughout the day. And in fact, actually during the peak hour, usually for certain streets, because of the congestion, the cut-through won't occur as much, actually. So, most agencies, as you can see on table 2, use average daily traffic as part of the Neighborhood Traffic Management Program volume threshold. And peak hour usually make up only about 10 to 12% during peak 1 hour, which is why we recommend using the average daily traffic as a volume threshold. The last criteria is collision criteria. So we're recommending that we look at the 36 months sort of average city collision. So, and I will compare that collision. Caltrans published different type of collision rate for different type of roadways. So we'll compare that. So we use that as a comparison. If it meets that sort of threshold, that would be one of the criteria for the Neighborhood Traffic Management Program. And also looking at the collision, it also would help us review whether what kind of issues, safety issues we're looking at, besides the traffic volume as well as the speed criteria. And see table 3, some agencies we show here also use the 3-year collision data. But of course, we know that there are special circumstances where it doesn't meet the sort of collision or volume or speed. So there are unique circumstances. For example, there are locations where there are no pedestrian path, no sidewalk, or very limited bike sort of route near schools, near park, all that. So based on individual circumstances, staff, will work with the people, the petition process, and collect necessary data, all that, for those unique circumstances. So it's recommended that Council adopt the Neighborhood Traffic Management Program. And as part of the process too, once it's adopted, staff would also conduct outreach to the neighborhood about the NTMP, and also staff will be having internal training, so that staff will be familiarized with the process. So with that, any question?
Okay. Mr. Olbert?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you. Nice presentation. Just a couple of quick questions, one of which is really more just an opportunity to enlarge upon something you said. The 7-mile-an-hour threshold before the plan can kick in, the concept can kick in. I think it's also worth reminding the public that that's in large measure because traffic tickets below a 7-mile-an-hour excess over speed limit are very difficult to get upheld in court. And I'm not saying that to blame the judges. I'm just saying that that's, as a practical matter, the way those are typically interpreted. So I think it's important the public know that it's not that we picked that number totally out of the air. It's that it would not really be an enforceable thing in practice, even though it is over the speed limit. The first question I had is the plan calls for allowing the interpretation of special circumstances in any given situation if, in fact, a given stretch of road doesn't otherwise meet the criteria that would trigger the action under the policy. I'd just like to get a sense from staff about how you see that working out, because it almost seems to me like if I was a resident on a street and I didn't like you coming back and say, well, it doesn't fit the criteria, I'd say, well, I have 4 special circumstances for you to consider. So how do you plan on working that through?
The way the fourth criteria came about was because during the conversation with the TNC, they felt that the other 3 were purely numerical criteria, and they didn't feel comfortable going strictly with numerical criteria, and wanted a special circumstances so that staff can really look into the site specifics, the character, and so forth. So we did put that in. That would be something that is case by case, obviously. It depends on if it's near school. So we would take all that into consideration if that's a special circumstance or not. Of course, it's subjective. So the applicant still might not agree with staff that it is or is not. And it still might go to, the TNC. You might hear it in front of council. But at least that was something that gave more leeway into the strictly numerical criteria.
And conceptually, that makes perfect sense. What I'm concerned about is in application, that could end up essentially undermining the entire policy. But you know what? I'm perfectly happy going ahead and trying this out. I guess what I wouldn't mind getting back either as a presentation to council or just having staff contact me if nobody else is interested, like, within a year or so, just how do they actually work out in practice? I'd be interested in seeing that. My last question actually has to do with there's a mechanism in the policy that if a residential area applies under the policy and then they can't get the 50% plus 1 vote of the local residents to agree to some step in the policy, there's a cutout period of, I think it's 2 years. And I'm fine with the concept of that, but was any consideration given to perhaps shortening that 2-year window if, for example, some large residential development went up nearby, something that sort of fundamentally changed the traffic stuff, in a permanent sense?
So I guess that application could come under special circumstances. Okay. But in general, 2 years doesn't change the character of the area very much. And that's why we had a threshold of 2 years. That's just to prevent people from trying
Sure.
time.
Actually, that's a fair point. I mean, the larger the construction project, I mean, they don't happen on less than a couple of year interval anyway, from start to finish. Okay, thank you.
Okay, Mr. Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thanks, Grace. A question for you and for Jeff, and maybe for the chief as well. I'm generally supportive of this policy, and what we hear as council members, particularly when we're out campaigning and otherwise, is like there's a general perception among residents that, there's a lot of streets in San Carlos, particularly the streets where they live, that have gotten worse, that are dangerous. They worry about their kids. People are cutting through their neighborhoods. People are driving too fast, et cetera. And then, as I joined the council, I kind of learned from staff that, we can't just put speed bumps everywhere. We can't put stop signs everywhere, and there's legitimate reasons for this. I think actually both are true, which is, it's costly, expensive, and there are downsides to putting in lots of traffic mitigation measures. But I also think that the perception among residents is true. I think the perception will get worse. over time as the population increases. And so what I'm wondering is, I think that, it's positive to have a policy so that it's clear to people like what the steps are. However, I regard the policy as like a very high hurdle to have to get over in order to get traffic mitigation measures put on your street. And so what I think is going to happen is, we're going to get people who say, hey, I'm concerned about the public safety on my street. We're going to point them to the policy. They're not going to be able to get over the hurdle. And what I'm wondering is kind of just from the staff's perspective, what do you do in that circumstance? Are we just going to say, sorry, there's nothing we could do? Or are there other things that we can do, whether it's, having the cops come out and monitor it, or I think what I'm worried is we're setting ourselves up for a situation where we're going to have unhappy residents because we've created a policy which cannot really address their real concerns.
Yeah, I'll take a stab at this. We will, with every request that comes in the door, we'll be communicating with the folks who make that request, the group or individual that put in the application, so to speak, as we go through the process of studying and gathering data, sharing that data with them, educating the group and the neighborhood about the traffic on their street. From the very beginning, the police department gets involved, as well as engineering, to take a look. It comes up on the radar for the police department. Typically, they'll take a closer look by having more traffic enforcement in the area to get a police perspective on what's going on out there, to kind of color in some of the data. And, hopefully in many instances that will help residents understand the need for the policy and guidelines. At the end of the day, staff will make their best recommendation to the TNC and the City Council. And as with many things we do, there are lots of gray areas and opportunities for extenuating circumstances to be heard and addressed by both our commissioners and the council. So at the end of the day, I imagine there still will be instances where the council will need to hear this type of issue and make decisions using the policy as a guideline, but again, not a hard and fast rule the way that it's written and prepared for you this evening.
Thanks, Jeff. That's helpful. I agree that it's like one of the helpful parts about this policy is it's sort of a co-education process where it gets the staff out into the neighborhood and the neighbors get to learn about, sort of get the staff's expertise on traffic mitigation. Just one last question is, do you think that because we have a policy that will increase or decrease like the staff engagement? Meaning, does the policy now trigger like a level of responsiveness and a level of like going through the steps for an incoming request more so than we have today, or is it sort of unchanged?
I think in that regard, it'll be unchanged. I think we get on these now. We do get quite a few from around the city, and they go into the queue, and we get to them when we can. I'm hoping that the policy will help direct staff's efforts in terms of what they're looking at and how they're handling them in the future. And as staff turns over and we get new people in, that they'll be up to speed and know how to handle those requests, and we can process them maybe a little bit quicker.
Thank you.
I had a couple of quick questions. So if I understand the speed criteria, Grace, maybe you can answer this question for me. Am I reading this right? If you find a street that people are really speeding, you increase the speed limit?
No, that's not it. So
isn't that what it says here?
If a neighborhood is saying that their speed is excessive on their streets,
okay,
we'll check the speed data and see if the 85th percentile speed is higher than the posted speed by 7 miles per hour.
Okay.
So if it is, it means that 85% of the people are driving above the speed limit, 7 miles per hour above the speed limit. So then we would look into traffic calming measures.
Okay, but what it says indicates a potential increase in posted speed limit. See, I'm a little confused. I'm trying to read the English language here and I'm not getting it.
Mayor, essentially what I'm saying is that typically for most of the streets here, the residential street, the default prima facie speed is 25 miles per hour.
Okay.
So if for certain streets, the city decided, well, more than 85% of the people are driving at more than 7 miles per hour, for example, and then collision data or that supports that, instead of 25 miles per hour street, that street, according to California state law, could be increased to 30 miles per hour.
That's what I
for
just
example.
said. So in other words, Grace, if to get back to you, it says here, so we've raised the speed limit. Isn't that a self-fulfilling prophecy?
So if
Why am I not getting this?
If the 85th percentile is 7 miles per hour greater than the posted speed limit, and if we don't do any traffic calming and it continues to be that way, and we do a speed survey, and we must raise the posted speed limit unless we're successful with the traffic calming. And that's why brings us to the need for traffic calming, and that's one of the criteria for traffic calming. We don't want speed to be 7 miles per hour.
It just seems like a self-fulfilling prophecy. When you raise the speed limit, they're just going to go over 7 more and keep going.
And it's because anything more than 7 miles per hour, we cannot, we won't be able to enforce it.
All right.
It's kind of like a speed trap.
Whatever. You guys know more than I do. I'm just reading the English language here, and I don't understand it too well. Do all 3 of these have to come into play, or just one of them?
Just one of them.
Just one of them? Okay. I guess that was all I had. Any other comments from the dais?
Yes.
Okay, Mr. Olbert again.
Actually, much like Mr. Grocott.
Okay, Mr. Grocott.
I'm just curious on this 7 miles an hour. So percentages have nothing to do with it in the sense that, if you're 7 miles over a 25 versus 7 over a 35, it's a different percentage.
Yeah, so back to that speed limit, posted speed limit, it's 7 miles above the posted speed limit. So whatever that, if it's 25, then it's, 7 miles above that. If it's 30 posted speed limits, it's 7 miles above that. So it's not really based on that percentage. It's really, that's the numerical number that that kind of puts you, whether your posted speed limit is correct or not, or whether you need to look into a different posted speed limit if your traffic calming is not successful.
Mr. Olbert?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Yeah, if I may attempt to clarify this a little bit. What I think may be confusing to folks is there's a odd interaction between state law and the way the laws are enforced, which are 2 different things. We often talk about that as we have rules, and then there's enforcement mechanisms that are not 100% perfect. So the state law basically says that, generally speaking, the speed limit on any road in California is what the 85th percentile drives. So it's basically set by the drivers, okay? And you can post a lower speed limit than that, but you can't enforce it in general. Totally separate from that, in practice, what law enforcement has learned is that it is very difficult, unless there are extenuating circumstances, to get a ticket for somebody doing, let's say, 29 miles an hour in a 25 mile an hour zone held up by the court. Now, that depends upon somebody actually going to contest it, but if they contest it, it is likely not to be sustained. That's where the threshold for the 7 miles an hour and the policy comes from. It's the interaction there. But Mayor Grisilli is absolutely right, because the speed limits in California are basically set by the people of California and how they drive. They are potentially subject to change.
Okay, Mr. Collins.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. This was all very clear to me until people started asking questions.
Sorry.
I really
We should be done by 10.
My question is, you mentioned that you make this decision between traffic calming measures and raising the speed limit. How do you make that choice? I mean, how do you choose between just looking at the data and say, oh, let's just raise the speed limit, and saying, well, there's no way we really can raise the speed limit, so let's now look at implementing traffic calming measures? How do you make that decision?
Traffic calming would be our first option. To try to lower the 85th percentile speed. But if we can't do that, and an engineering study shows that 85th percentile is too high, we would be forced to. But that would be our first option to try to lower the speed limit.
All right, so your first option
Traffic
is
calming.
try to calm it. And if you realize that, in other words, you can't calm it, but you realize the road can handle a higher speed limit, given its width and all the other factors that you determine, then you would.
Right. So
Then
it's
you would
not
raise it.
only the 85th percentile speed, it's also the character of the roadway, too. 85% of the drivers are comfortable driving at that level. There must be some reason. Is it because, roads are wide? Then we might want to stripe it so it's more narrow or more defined, an edge line. So there's different techniques that we use to try to calm down the speed, and not just physically what you see, like a speed hump or anything. We can do reinforcement, we can do radar feedback, different striping can help, signage can help too. If we said, there's a senior center nearby or whatever, that type of signage can help. So there's different levels of what we call traffic calming, but different levels of tools that we can use.
Thank you.
If I may just add to that a little more color. As a motorist, I've encountered a handful of roadways driving around San Mateo County where I felt like the speed limit probably could be raised. None of those were in San Carlos. Virtually every street we have is a residential street. Even our collectors and arterials in this town tend to be residential. And I can't recall in the last 20 years ever looking at raising a speed limit in town. So our preference, and really what the policy would be telling us, is, hey, here's a street where you need traffic calming, because we're going to try to get that speed data down so that our current speed limit is enforceable.
Okay. Mr. Olbert, last comment?
Yeah, just a quick question for staff. Jeff, you had mentioned that, this may be a Grace question too, you had mentioned that staff does get a fair number of these types of requests in any given year. Roughly speaking, if we adopt this policy, how many of those are you going to be rejecting, percentage-wise?
Well, the criteria is for a level 2 program. So we do a lot of level 1 programs. So they're be rejecting. I think we've only got 2 or 3 requests for a corridor, level 2 type. So it really depends on the data that we gather for those. But I'm expecting hopefully no more than 2 or 3 corridor requests.
That's a small number thing. Do you anticipate that the new policy will have a significant effect on the number of, or the proportion of the level 1 requests that you react to?
We get a lot of level 1 requests, and we're processing them through very similar to our NTMP, and that's why we came up with the NTMP. Okay. But we're doing those requests.
So you don't anticipate there'll be much change on that side?
Yeah, and then really the NTMP is so that there's a policy that the requester knows what to expect. So
transparency. Got it. Thank you.
Okay, so this isn't a public hearing, but is there anyone wishing to speak on this item? All right, gentlemen, what would you like to do?
Mr. Mayor, I move to adopt Resolution 2018-22. 22, a resolution of the City Council of the City of San Carlos approving the Neighborhood Traffic Management Program.
Second.
All right, it's moved and seconded. Any discussion? Hearing none, roll call, please.
Councilmember Collins?
Yes.
Councilmember Grocott?
Yes.
Councilmember Johnson?
Yes.
Councilmember Obert?
Yes.
And Mayor Grisilli?
Yes. All right, thank you. Thank you very much. All right, moving on. Item 7B, consideration of mayor's investigation into the City Code of Conduct and Ethics policy violations. Staff, is there any report from you?
There's no report, Mr. Mayor, other than the staff report that just lays out the facts of the particular matter and the allegations and the rules that apply.
Okay, thank you. Well, as I did last month, or should I say in December, I guess in January, we had this, the items came up in December, but we talked about them in January. I've completed the preliminary investigation called for in the City Code of Conduct and Ethics. I reviewed the email complaints and the related documents sent by the residents and the letter from Councilmember Grocott dated December 10th, 2017. I interviewed Council Members Collins and Olbert as well. And I've come to the conclusion that I've determined the complaints against both Councilmember Collins and Councilmember Obert do not reach the threshold of a violation of code of conduct, and it's not in the best interest of the city to request the City Council to authorize the hiring of an independent investigator. As I said in December, I'm sure my fellow council members will agree that we should all do our best to uphold the principles of the code of conduct and ethics in future meetings. Comments from the dais?
Mr. Mayor, I have a comment, but I think, should we see if there's public comment?
There will be. I'm asking for comments from the dais right now. If you'd like to speak now, or you can speak later. It's up to you. Nothing now? Okay. Anyone in the public wishing to speak on this item? All right, Mr. Olbert.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I appreciate the mayor's recommendation that no further review of the code of conduct complaint take place. For anyone who was offended by how I cast my vote on the moratorium or was put off by how exuberant I was afterwards, my apologies, sincerely. I meant no offense in either case. I've worked for years to have attention paid to the issue of gun violence, and I simply wanted to express my very strong support for the council's action. It was, in my opinion, one of the most significant decisions the council has made in years. I look forward to the discussions the community and the council will have on this very important topic.
All right, thank you for your comments. All right, moving on. Item 8A, council members' reports on subcommittees, regional boards, commissions, and so on.
Mr. Mayor,
Yes, sir.
can we back up just one step?
Sure. I'm sorry, I didn't see your light. I apologize.
I was a little late turning it on.
Okay.
I would just ask that when we as council members have correspondence with the public, that we do not include any colorization, any commentary, any word at all about other council members. I don't think it's appropriate, and if there's a comment that a member of the public makes about one of us to a different one of us, I think the right thing to do is to send that person to that council member and say, you know, if you have a complaint about whomever, go to that person directly. And for one of us to include commentary about any others on the dais is inappropriate. Whether it's whether it's a positive or a negative, because you can't very well speak for somebody else. And the things that were written about me by another council member in an email, I certainly didn't appreciate, and I didn't think it was appropriate. So just wanted to include that.
Thank you for your comment. Anyone else before I move on the dais? All right. Item 8A, council members' report, subcommittees, regional boards, commissions, and committees. Mr. Olbert.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Crystal, could you pop up that? And can I get the remote control? Or you can punch through the pages. There are only 3 of them. So I just had a couple of quick things. First 2 items actually have to do with some blog posts that I wrote recently. And I'm just going to announce them here for anybody who's interested. First one is entitled The $38 Million Question. And it has to do with kicking off our biannual budget process, $38 million being roughly the amount of money that the city has in its financial reserves at this point in time. And the question is, what does the public think we should do with that? You can go read why I think this is an interesting topic, and hopefully after you've thought about it, you will weigh in, because I'd love to hear from you, and I'm sure my colleagues would too. Next page, please. I also wrote something about the situation that evolved recently at the Depot Cafe with its closure. I don't pretend to be an expert on every single factor that went into it, but I did learn a bunch of stuff from talking to various people, and if there's anybody who's curious about what I learned, you can, again, go to my blog, council.olbert.com, and you punch up the article on the Depot Cafe, and you'll see the information there. But the last and most important one was, Mayor Grisilli, you've got somebody competing for your job. I had the great pleasure of working with a young man in San Carlos by the name of Zane King, whose father I met at Pete's Coffee. He came up to me one day when I was there. Zane is a Cub Scout. And one of his tasks in his troop is he has to learn more about, or had to learn more about civic processes and whatnot. And so his dad thought it would be fun for him to come down and learn a little bit about how council meetings work and whatnot. And so I took the opportunity to temporarily promote him to mayor and showed him how your buttons work and stuff. I think he actually may have had a better handle on it than...
Sure, he has a better handle on it than I do, the buttons.
But I will tell you that the thing that I enjoyed most about talking to Zane is he came with a number of prepared questions. But as you can see, to give him a feel for how meetings work, I actually was at the podium and he was asking me the questions. And he had a bunch of really good follow-up questions. He really was paying attention. He really thought about stuff, and he had a lot of really good insights. So, Zane, if you're watching this or if you watch it on tape delay, there's always room for people in democracy to step forward and be community leaders, and I hope that you will be one day. Thanks.
All right. And now I know in case I can't come to a meeting who to call, so that's good. Mr. Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I just wanted to let my colleagues know that we had a Transportation Authority board meeting the first week of February. The city has applied for a grant under the Bike and Pedestrian Program for funding for San Carlos Avenue pedestrian improvements. Out of about maybe a couple dozen projects, the TA staff is recommending awarding City of San Carlos $1 million, which is the highest award, and it's one of, I think, between 7 and 10 projects which the staff is recommending funding. That vote will occur the first Thursday in March, so that's great news for funding some pedestrian safety projects on San Carlos Avenue.
Great, thank you. Mr. Collins?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just a couple things. I had the honor to go to the Healthy Cities Tutoring, what was it called? Perfect Pairings last Friday night, and some of my fellow council members were there. It's a great, Healthy Cities Tutoring, as you know, is a great program in San Carlos, and it was great to see a lot of people there. I also attended my first airport roundtable. That's a far cry from the Airport Land Use Commission, which never has anybody. The meetings are over in 20 minutes. But this was a very good discussion about airport noise, air traffic issues, and pollution around San Francisco Airport. So as there becomes more information that relates to San Carlos, I will report on that. Lastly, we had a Caltrain electrification meeting at the end of January where we got an update on the business plan, and I took the opportunity to ask them, Caltrain, to please consider forming a separate body to pursue federal funding for grade separations. In 2 to 3 years, I guess it's about 3 years, we're going to have up to 10 trains per hour running up and down the peninsula. We have 42 grade separations, and that's going to mean a lot more gate downtime. The grade separation issue is about a $6 billion problem because it's about $150 million per grade separation. And I don't think that we've paid enough attention to it. I think we do. I brought it up at a meeting with my Congresswoman, Jackie Spear, at a meeting a couple Saturdays ago, and I think it's something that we need to pursue because that kind of money is not going to be found with a bond issue for San Francisco, San Mateo, and Santa Clara counties. Not even for California. It's going to have to come from federal sources. So I'm going to be bringing that up as often as I can. I do have a couple of other council members in other cities that are in my camp, so I'm on a recruiting mission to find as many people as I can to lobby our congressional representatives to really push for more federal funds. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for your comments. The only comment I have is that Silicon Valley Clean Water sold some bonds on Thursday, and I think it was 3.45. We had 8 or 9 bidders, and the rate was like 3.45, I think, or something like that. Is that right? Tara, do you know? Okay, but it was low, and we were happy with all the bidders, and so that'll help us to float the bonds for the improvements we need to keep doing at Silicon Valley Clean Water. All right, staff, comments?
Yeah, just a quick update. We are in the middle of a Public Works Director recruitment. The filing deadline has passed. We're currently reviewing a bunch of good applications, and we hope to have interviews in the next month.
Are you excited, Tara? All right, is there anything else in the dais? All right, meeting adjourned.